You can go ahead and start it.
Heavenly King, O Comforter, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good gifts and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one.
Tonight, we have our 9th lesson on living an Orthodox life. And this discussion will be on marriage. Last week we had on monasticism, this week we have on marriage. So, what is marriage? Anybody?
Raise a hand.
Yeah.
It's one of the mysteries of the church.
Excellent. You could be quoting Father Seraphim on the law of God. That's exactly what he says. Marriage is the mystery during which the public vows are made before the priest and the church by the groom and the bride to be faithful to each other. Their conjugal union is blessed as an image of the spiritual union of Christ with the church. The grace of God is requested and given for their mutual assistance, unanimity, and for the blessed procreation and Christian upbringing of the children, which is exactly what you said.
Excellent.
Yes. That's in part 4, chapter 4 of the law of God. So, if that's what marriage is, how did it come about?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. You must have been reading St. John Damascene. It's established by God in paradise and is blessed by Christ. In paradise, virginity held sway. Indeed, divine scripture tells that both Adam and Eve were naked and were not ashamed. But after their transgression, they knew that they were naked, and in their shame they sewed aprons for themselves. And when after the transgression Adam heard, "Dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return," when death entered into the world by reason of the transgression, then Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare seed. So that to prevent the wearing out and destruction of the race by death, marriage was devised that the race of men may be preserved through the procreation of children. That's exact exposition of the Orthodox faith, book 4, chapter 24. St. John Chrysostom has this to say: "From one, namely Adam, he made the whole race to spring, preventing them by the strongest necessity from being ever torn asunder or separated, and afterward making it more restricted. He no longer allowed sisters and daughters to be wives, lest we should, on the other hand, contract our love to one point, and thus in another manner be cut off from one another. Hence Christ said, 'He which made them from the beginning made them male and female.'" That's in Gospel of St. Matthew. That's St. John Chrysostom's homily 20 on the book of Ephesians. Note, he makes a rather important point. In the Old Testament, we read about how polygamy was practiced, and close kinfolk would be married. St. John Chrysostom is saying, if God had allowed that to continue indefinitely, then we as human beings would be contracting our attention, our love, down to the most narrow point possible. And you see this, it did happen after the Old Testament. The Egyptian pharaohs, for instance, would be marrying their brothers and sisters, wives, their daughters, and so their nieces and close relatives. And that invariably brought about not just spiritual problems, but physical problems as well. The Habsburgs also infamously, as emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, so-called, were marrying their close relatives as well. And they also had both spiritual and physical problems. God brings about marriage so that we can be united one to another through God, through Christ. And that's what the sacrament of marriage brings us to, which is to say it's sanctified by God.
When did he say that change came about?
Well, it comes about, it's, you know, the patriarchs, the Old Testament patriarchs would marry their kinfolk. But by the end of the Old Testament, this is no longer permitted. The law of Moses actually
So
cuts it off.
Moses cuts it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although there were instances where it still happened, but those invariably were not according to the will of God. And certainly by the time Christ comes, I mean, he rebukes the Sadducees when they bring him that attempt to trap him by saying, 7 brothers have this woman for their wife because they each die in turn. Whose wife is it? And he says, you don't know either the scriptures or the law, that marriage is given for your weaknesses and your faults. In the kingdom of heaven, that there will be neither marrying nor giving in marriage. They'll be like the angels.
Because again, there won't be death.
There won't be death.
So I have a question about that first part where you said that if they didn't consummate the marriage until after the fall because they didn't need to or something. But
They were living as
so
innocents.
If the fall never happened, where would the people come from?
What people? There would be Adam and Eve.
That's it?
That was
Well,
all needed, because
that's
they
all-
They wouldn't have died.
Well, who's to say? I mean, you're positing
Well,
a
that's
hypothetical
hypothetical,
that
yeah.
clearly was never intended.
Right.
God from the beginning knew
that
that there would be a fall.
Yeah.
He knew that death would enter into it,
Yeah.
and in his mercy and his love, he provided for it.
Okay.
If there had not been a fall, who's to say that God would not have created other people
Right, yeah.
in some other manner?
Right.
I mean, we don't know that, and it's not worth speculating,
Right.
because that's
Yeah.
not what happened. And the fathers are pretty clear that God provided everything for the economy of salvation.
I wanted to comment on the close marriage in terms of, now we know about genetics and all
Yeah.
this other stuff, but you can easily see that in terms of before the fall, there was no sin, there was no death. Well, what are the genetic diseases we see with close marriages? They're symptoms of a fallen nature and death entering into every part of creation.
That's correct.
And so, as time goes on and more of creation is corrupted by sin, the genetic anomalies, which wouldn't have existed in Adam and Eve, slowly creep into the human condition.
And the commands to be fruitful and multiply were given before the fall.
Correct.
So there would be a way provided for the animals to everybody.
Although the fathers will also comment on that and say that God knew what would come, and he provided from the very beginning for the fall, for life to continue after the fall. But yes, you're right. Both of those are true statements. So marriage is blessed by God. Father Michael Pomazanski in the Orthodox Dogmatic Theology on his chapter on his section on marriage has this to say: that marriage has the blessing of God upon it is said many times in the Holy Scripture. Thus in Genesis chapter 1 verses 27 and 8, we read, God so created man in his own image. In the image of God he created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, which is the point you just made. Likewise, in Genesis 2:18-24, the writer of Genesis, having spoken of the creation of the woman from the rib of Adam, and of how she was led to the man, adds, Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And we have explicitly Christ sanctifying marriage by his presence at the wedding in Cana of Galilee. And he confirmed it as a divine institution by saying, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. That's Matthew chapter 19, verses 4-6, quoted by Father Seraphim in Law of God. So, God clearly intended marriage to be a part of our human life. And we see in our own nature that this is an essential part. Because marriage will form the closest human relationship that we have. St. Ignatius Brianchinov has this to say, The union of the sexes in its essential form is natural to fallen nature. Virginity is supernatural. Consequently, he who wishes to maintain his body in virginity must without fail keep it at a distance from that body which nature requires that it should unite. The bodies of man and woman contain an invisible power that mutually attracts body to body. That's St. Ignatius chapter 42. And he's got a point here. We have a natural attraction, current popular sentiment notwithstanding, where we are attracted male to female. And all of the monastic fathers make a point about this, how those who wish to live a chaste life in virginity have to be very careful to avoid much contact with the opposite sex, lest they be tempted by this, as he put it, natural, invisible power that mutually attracts body to body. Indeed, and from the beginning, God appears to have made special provision for this union, and discoursing of the two as one, he said thus, Male and female he created them, and again, there is neither male nor female. That's Galatians chapter 3:28. For there is no relationship between man and man so close as that between man and wife, if they be joined together as they should be, which is what we're going to be talking about. And therefore a certain blessed man too, when he would express surpassing love and was mourning for one that was dear to him, and of one soul with him, did not mention father, nor mother, nor child, nor brother, nor friend, but what? Your love to me was wonderful, says he, passing the love of women. That's from 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26. For indeed, in very deed, this love is more despotic than any despotism. For others indeed may be strong, but this passion is not only strong, but unfading. For there is a certain love deeply seated in our nature, which imperceptibly to ourselves knits together these bodies of ours. That's St. John Chrysostom, again from the homily on Ephesians. Another quote, so difficult and impracticable is unanimity, where persons are not bound together by that love which is founded in supreme authority. At all events, fear will not necessarily affect this. Accordingly, he dwells the more on this, which is the strong tie. And the wife, though seeming to be the loser in that she is charged to fear, is the gainer, because the principal duty, love, is charged upon the husband. But what, one may say, if a wife reverence me not? Never mind, you are to love, fulfill your own duty. For though that which is due from others may not follow, we ought, of course, to do our duty. This is an example of what I mean. He says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of Christ. And what then if another submit not himself? Still obey thou the law of God. Just so, I say, is it also here. Let the wife at least, though she not be loved, still reverence notwithstanding. that nothing may lie at her door, and let the husband, though his wife reverence him not, still show her love notwithstanding, that he himself be not wanting in any point, for each has received his own. We are charged, man and woman both, in the ceremony of matrimony, to love and to cherish and to fear, but to fear as Christ. We are to do this as an image of God's love. And so we have this duty, St. John Chrysostom is telling us, regardless of what anybody else does, it is our duty to fulfill, and if we fail to fulfill it, then we are guilty. He goes on to say, but he does not say, and shall not dwell with. He does not say, and shall dwell with, but shall cleave unto, thus showing the closeness of the union and the fervent love. Nay, he is not content with this, but further by what he adds, he explains the subjection in such a way as that the two appear no longer two. He does not say one spirit, he does not say one soul, for that is manifest and is possible to anyone, but so as to be one flesh. She is a second authority, possessing indeed an authority and considerable equality of dignity, but at the same time the husband has somewhat of superiority. In this consists most chiefly the well-being of the house. For he took that former argument, the example of Christ, to show that we ought not only to love, but also to govern, that she may be, he says, holy and without blemish. But the word flesh has reference to love, and the word shall cleave has in like manner reference to love. For if you shall make her holy and without blemish, everything else will follow. Seek the things which are of God, and those which are of man will follow readily enough. Govern your wife, and thus will the whole house be in harmony. Hear what Paul says, and if they would learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home. That's 1 Corinthians 14:35. If we thus regulate our own houses, we shall also fit for the management of the church. For indeed a house is a little church. Thus it is possible for us, by becoming good husbands and wives, to surpass all others. There's several things here that I think we need to keep in mind. First, no matter how close we may be and how much we may love one another, as he says, it is difficult and impractical to have unanimity. We are still two souls, two people, and we have two conceptions of what should be done. So it is often, and anybody who's married knows this, likely that we will have disagreements in marriage. The bond of marriage has to surpass that if it was ever blessed at all. The second that he puts it to is the words that are used are we cleave unto. And he makes a big point about this. We become, as it were, one flesh. And I don't think it's too much to say that in becoming one flesh, we are, through the love of God and the grace of God, able to participate in the creation of new life. This is the one place where mankind does participate with God in the creation of life. All the other creation that God does is external to us. Any comments or thoughts on that? There's a lot there.
Yeah, that's huge. So I kind of tend to think of things like iconologically, I guess, like as icons. Would it be, I didn't hear any mention of it, like where my mind goes with marriage is it's like an icon of the collective unity that exists in the three persons of the Trinity. Is there? Yes.
That the fathers do talk about that. And it was mentioned in some of the quotations we've had that the marriage is an image of the love of God. It is, we participate in the love of God. let's not forget that God's love surpasses all, so that he gave his only begotten Son that we might be saved, St. John's Gospel. And we all love that we have is to a greater or lesser extent an image of the love of God. Imperfect image, but it is still an image of the love of God. On top of that, the marriage becomes, as St. John Chrysostom talks about, the basis or a little church. It becomes the basis for a church community. And later on, you'll hear some quotes where St. Paul is greeting various peoples in the house of somebody or other. He does that in several of his epistles. And that's how the church was founded, as home communities. And those became, as it were, the building blocks of the church as a whole.
Well, thank you, Father.
Now, did anybody pick up on how marriage is organized?
The man's in charge.
It's hierarchical.
The governor has it said.
Mm-hmm. Why is marriage hierarchical?
Harkening back to what he just said about the icon, iconography of it, it's hierarchical because it is a type of the church, which is a type of the Trinity, all of which are hierarchical as well.
Right. Can anybody name anything in creation that is any good that is not hierarchical? Basically, all of creation, society, spiritual and physical, is formed in a hierarchical format.
Monarch Elizabeth also said, as a little church, presumably before I had responded.
Yes. And that's quoting St. John Chrysostom. St. John Chrysostom has this to say: however, when you hear of fear, demand that fear which becomes a free woman, not as though thou were expecting it of a slave. For she is your own body, and if you do this, you reproach yourself in dishonoring your own body. And of what nature is this fear? It is not the contradicting, not the rebelling, not the not being fond of preeminence. It is enough that fear be kept within these bounds. But if you love as you are commanded, you will make it yet greater. Or rather, it will not be any longer fear that you will be doing this, but love itself will have its effect. The sex is somehow weaker and needs much support, much condescension. So let's talk about fear. Why does fear enter into the relationship at all?
Well, it's also in some of Paul's writings, it's reverence. She
Right.
shall reverence her husband.
Yes.
And that could be said as fear, I guess, too.
Yeah, and there is numerous instances, particularly in the Psalms, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the Proverbs for that matter as well, where we are to fear and love God. They go hand in hand, and it has to do with reverence. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, and I don't know Greek well enough to be able to speak to it. That those fear and reverence are, whether they're interchangeably or whether the translation was just put this way, sometimes that happens. But he does address that this is not, you're not dealing with a slave, a master-slave relationship. You're dealing with a equal relationship, but that it is hierarchical and that there is an order to it. And so that's the type of reverence or fear that one should have.
Well, and he also said that when that is working correctly, she will not be desiring the preeminence.
Correct.
And without fear, that wouldn't be the case.
Right. Which is to say that our passions will enter into our relationships. And when they do, when we seek the first place, or we seek to rebel, or we seek to have my way, basically willful, then the marriage will break down. That relationship breaks down. In his homily on 1 Corinthians, St. John Chrysostom says this: "Elsewhere I grant he gives to the husband abundant precedence, both in the New Testament and the Old, saying, 'Your turning shall be toward your husband, and he shall rule over you.' Paul does so too by making a distinction thus in writing in Ephesians, 'Husbands, love your wives, and let the wife see that she reverence her husband.'" There's the word reverence instead of fear. "But in this place we hear no more of greater and less, but it is one and the same right." Now why is this? Because his speech was about chastity. "And all other things, says he, let the husband have the prerogative, but not so where the question is about chastity. The husband has no power over his own body, neither the wife. There is great equality of honor and no prerogative." Which is also where we get away from polygamy, which by the time of, it was gotten rid of in the law of Moses, but it's also very much contradicted by Christ, that this is a single relationship. And the church to this day will grant second marriages, but the second marriage is one that is somewhat sorrowful, because it's done in, as St. Paul says, better to marry than to burn,
Right.
as a condescension to our weakness. So, is it possible that marriage will sanctify the husband and the wife? And the children?
I mean, if I may
Possibly,
say,
yes.
I can absolutely attest that I often think, like, if I was just a single guy, I mean, I could go do this, that, and the other thing, but for all of these obligations, and it's like, take a step back and look at all this, it's like, yeah, absolutely, you're set apart for a purpose much bigger than yourself. That's like itself a type of the church. Like, I can totally see that.
How does that work, that it sanctifies?
Like by what process? You mean?
Well, yeah.
How would I put that?
Well, it is an act, when done through the church, that is blessed by the church, and thereby blessed by God and the Holy Spirit, and allows the union to mystically become one, thereby sanctifying all that's involved, sanctifying to make holy.
What does the church teach about hermits in monasticism?
They have to have a high degree of spiritual attainment before they can even do that,
Why?
because of the passions, and because of the possibility, or the probability of delusion.
I hear anger's a big one.
And so, in monasticism, we have Cenobitic and Eremitic paths. The Cenobitic path gives you a community that can help support you. What does Christ say about us praying together, that he will be there? Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I will be. Marriage provides a support for each individual member to overcome their spiritual struggles, their war against the passions, and each spouse will help to support or correct or to provide a means of overcoming temptations such that we can gain victories over the enemy. And St. Paul specifically talks about how it sanctifies in 1 Corinthians. St. John Chrysostom commenting says, "Unless the woman might fear as though she became unclean because of intercourse with her husband," he says, "for the unbelieving husband is sanctified in the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified in the husband." And he uses the word sanctified. "And yet if he that is joined to a harlot is one body, it is quite clear that the woman who also is joined to an idolater is one body. Well, it is one body, nevertheless she becomes not unclean, but the cleanness of the wife overcomes the uncleanness of the husband. And again, the cleanness of the unbelieving husband overcomes the uncleanness of the believing wife. So it does sanctify. And, there will be people who will say that marriage is only for the procreation of children, and that after that's no longer possible, then one doesn't do much of anything. He's talking about it's more than just that. It's sanctification. It's a means by which we acquire the kingdom of heaven. It's a path that leads to salvation or sanctification.
I wanted to comment because it's something that I've not heard here, but I've heard other non-Orthodox people talk about how it's like, especially this is true of the Protestants. It's like, the marriage sanctifies all the things, and so then they go and do degenerate things to each other, saying, "Oh, we're married, so these things." But that is not what is sanctified. You're not sanctified in degeneracy.
No. That's a situation of the one leads the other into temptation and sin.
Right.
So, and the same thing with, let's have an open marriage or something like that.
Right.
That is directly contrary to the Orthodox concept of marriage.
Your marriage is sanctified as long as you maintain a sanctified marriage.
It mirrors the union of Christ with the church.
Right.
Just as the house church is the basic unit of the church, the marriage mirrors that union between Christ and the church. The Apostle Paul compares the union of marriage with the union of Christ. It's in Ephesians. St. John Chrysostom says, "Praise her not for her beauty. Praise and hatred and love based on personal beauty belong to unchastened souls," which is what you're talking about. "Seek thou for beauty of soul. Imitate the bridegroom of the church. Outward beauty is full of conceit and great license, and throws men into jealousy, and the thing often makes you suspect monstrous things. But has it any pleasure? For the first or second month, perhaps, or at most for a year, but then no longer. The admiration by familiarity wastes away. Meanwhile, the evils which arose from the beauty still abide, the pride, the folly, the contemptuousness. Wherein one who is not such, there is nothing of this kind. But the love, having begun on just grounds, still continues ardent, since its object is beauty of soul and not of marriage becomes spiritual, and it leads to sanctification because it is a mirror of the image of Christ in the church. As great love as each entertains toward himself, so great he would have us entertain toward a wife, not because we partake of the same nature. No, this is ground of duty toward a wife, is far greater than that. It is that there are not two bodies but one, he the head, she the body. And how he says elsewhere, the head of Christ in 1 Corinthians. This I say too, that we are one body, so also are Christ and the Father one. And thus then is the Father also found to be our head. He sets down two examples, that of the natural body and that of Christ's body. And hence he adds further, on verse 32, this is a great mystery, but I speak in regard of Christ and the church. Why does he call it a great mystery? That is something great and wonderful the blessed Moses, or rather God, intimated. For the present, however, he says, I speak regarding Christ, that having left the Father, he came down and came to the bride and became one spirit. For he that is joined unto the Lord is one spirit. And well he says, it is a great mystery. That's St. John Chrysostom on his commentary on Ephesians. So that seems to be what marriage is. How do we live in a marriage? What are our obligations?
Love and respect.
Love and respect, and obedience, and sacrifice. The union of Jesus Christ with the church is founded upon the love of Christ for the church and upon the complete devotion of the church to the will of Christ. Hence, the husband is obliged to love his wife selflessly, and the wife is obliged to voluntarily, lovingly obey her husband. Husbands, says the Apostle Paul, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and gave himself for it. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, each spouse, husband or wife, is obliged to preserve mutual love and respect, mutual sacrifice and fidelity, just as you said. Like all sacraments, marriage is given to man in order to help him save his soul. If the husband or wife do not live in a Christian manner, the sacrament of marriage will not save them. Good Christian family life is the source of personal and public good. The family is the foundation of the Church of Christ. That's Father Seraphim, law of God. And then voluntarily obeying. For there is nothing which so welds our life together as the love of man and wife. For this many will lay aside even their arms. For this they will give up life itself. And Paul would never, without a reason and without an object, have spent so much pains on this subject as when he says here, wives, be in subjection to your own husbands as unto the Lord. And why so? Because when they are in harmony, the children are well brought up, and the domestics are in good order, and neighbors and friends and relations enjoy the fragrance. But if it be otherwise, all is turned upside down and thrown into confusion. St. John Chrysostom on Ephesians. So it has practical implications, doesn't it? If we are conducting our relations with one another in accord with the law of love, Christ and the church, then that will work its way through not just our lives and our relationship, but all around us. One thinks about Saint Seraphim and his comment, you save your soul and 1,000 around you will be saved. And especially, I mean, it's love, but it's also all these other things we've been talking about. There's a hierarchy, there's order implemented, and it's not imposed as a tyrant, it's imposed to provide a structure, if you will, to what makes for a good family living. And we all know in our own lives that we do need to regulate our daily lives according to some kind of a schedule, getting up at the same time, having our meals at the same time, our prayers, our work, all of the things that we do during the day. Because if we don't, then our life's a mess. And we accomplish very little. Whereas if we order our lives, and this is true for the whole family, then much can be accomplished. Where does sacrifice enter into this?
Well, as all the quotes to the Apostle Paul say, the sacrifice is that you're no longer living for yourself. You're no longer your body, but is your spouse's body. And you sacrifice every day to ensure that what you do in your life and your marriage is towards that end and that goal. If you leave apart your...
What does the church teach us about submitting our will? Just in general.
Must always submit our will to God.
To the will of God. Isn't that really what the Christian struggle, spiritual warfare is all about? Is the submission of our will to the will of God. Not such that we're just obeying it, but that we actively desire the will of God.
Which means to actively put aside our own will. So that's a part of the sacrifice.
Oriented towards.
It's, I would not say, I mean, yes, we put it aside, that's how it works, but the perfection comes in our not putting it aside, but desiring, our will, desiring the will of God. Saint Isaac the Syrian talking about the perfect prayer, not a lot of words, it's you enter into the grace of God, and you just be. Your being is there. You're desiring this above all, and all things that are not the will of God are left behind. It's very difficult to understand that concept in any practical way, because very few people experience that for very much at all, and most of our prayer is caught up with things of this world. So our true prayer, where we are entered into oneness with God, which is what it comes down to, is few and far between. But that is how we are sacrificing. And it comes back to the Lord's words. He who would lose his life for my sake will gain it. That makes absolutely no sense to the worldly wise, where all they think they have is this life and they cling to it tenaciously and will sacrifice everything to try to keep it. But with not understanding that in doing that, they've basically cut themselves off from life itself.
That's just a little bit confusing, because you talked about, you know, the perfect prayer and your will being one with the will of God and so forth. It seems to me that at that point, there's no sacrifice at all.
The sacrifice is how you get to that point.
Right, okay.
St. John Chrysostom, again on his homily on Ephesians. The reason I'm going so much on Ephesians, that the epistle to the Ephesians is read as the epistle in the wedding service. And St. John Chrysostom's homilies on the whole of the scriptures are among the best. You have seen the measure of obedience, here also the measure of love. Would you have your wife obedient unto you as the church is to Christ? Then take yourself the same provident care for her as Christ takes for the church. Yea, even if it shall be needful for you to give your life for her, yea, and to be cut into pieces 10,000 times, yea, and to endure and undergo any sufferings whatsoever, refuse it not. Though you should undergo all of this, yet will you not, no, not even then, have done anything like Christ. For thou indeed art doing it for one to whom you are already knit, but he for one who turned her back on him and hated him. In the same way then, as he laid at his feet, her who turned her back on him, who hated and spurned and disdained him, not by menaces, nor by violence, nor by terror, nor by anything else of the kind, but by his unwearied affection, so also do thou behave yourself toward your wife. Yea, though thou see her looking down upon you, and disdaining and scorning you, yet by your great thoughtfulness for her, by affection, by kindness, you will be able to lay her at your feet. For there is nothing more powerful to sway than these bonds, and especially for husband and wife. A servant indeed, one who will be able perhaps to bind down by fear, nay, not even him, for he will soon start away and be gone. But the partner of one's life, the mother of one's children, the foundation of one's every joy, one ought never to chain down by fear and menaces, but with love and good temper. For what sort of union is that where the wife trembles at her husband? And what sort of pleasure will the husband himself enjoy if he dwells with his wife as with a slave, and not as with a free woman? Yea, though thou shouldst suffer anything on her account, do not upbraid her, for neither did Christ do this. That's kind of powerful. It also, to the feminists who don't like women, obey your husband, it puts another tenor on that meaning, doesn't it? What does it mean to love without stint? And even if you do all of that, St. John Chrysostom tells us, we haven't done anything like what Christ did. Because we have, as it were, this connection with our wife, whereas Christ, I mean, the man of sorrows, is that from Isaiah, I think it is, where it talks about his sufferings for mankind. And we have, of course, in the Gospels, how often the people who most should have reverenced him and flocked to him and exalted him were the ones who sought and ultimately did reject and kill him, and then lie about it. So, whatever good you think you've done, think again. So, we talked about marriage a little bit now. What's the other way of life that's blessed? There's two ways of life that are blessed by God. Monasticism or virginity. Which is the greater?
Monasticism.
Why?
That's a good question. I actually have
Because it is closest to the angelic life.
That goes beyond me.
Yeah, at the very beginning, somebody that you were quoting said it was supernatural.
Mhm.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Because the attraction of man and woman together is natural.
Is natural,
Mhm.
right.
Gotcha.
That was, let me see. I can't find it. Doesn't matter. Father Michael Pomazanski in Dogmatic Theology has this to say. There is yet another way of personal life which is blessed in Christianity, virginity or celibacy. Celibacy for the sake of Christ has created another kind of Christian social unit, monasticism. The Church places it above married life, and in actuality, in the history of the Church, it has been a leading, guiding element and a support of the Church, bringing into realization to the greatest degree the moral law of the gospel and preserving the dogmas, the divine services, and other foundations of the Church. So there's really two reasons why it's the greater of the two. The first is it's a sacrifice for the sake of Christ. But then secondly, because the monastics sacrifice that way, they are more free to be a guiding element, a support of the Church, bringing into realization the greatest degree of the moral law of the gospel, and preserving the dogmas, divine services, and other foundations of the Church. And it's invariably the monastics who struggle first and foremost against the heresies that would uproot the whole of Christian salvation. So what examples do we have in the Old Testament?
Of what?
Marriage.
Or of monasticism.
Marriage.
Oh, marriage. Like Abraham and Sarah,
Mhm.
and like Isaac and Rebecca,
Mm-hmm.
And those
Jacob,
get-
and then several.
Those get listed in the marriage ceremony too.
They
Right.
do.
Right.
St. John Damascene talks about this. And he talks about how there were periods when we come together with our wives and when we stay separate from them. Noah, when he was commanded to enter the ark and was entrusted with the preservation of the seed of the world, received this command. Go in, saith the Lord, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives. He separated them from their wives in order that with purity they might escape the flood and the shipwreck of the whole world. After the cessation of the flood, however, he said, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives. Lo, again, marriage is granted for the sake of the multiplication of the race. Next, Elias, the fire-breathing charioteer and sojourner in heaven, did not embrace celibacy, and yet was not his virtue attested by his superhuman ascension? Who closed the heavens? Who raised the dead? Who divided Jordan? Was it not the virginal Elias? And did not Elisha, his disciple, after he had given proof of equal virtue, ask and obtain as an inheritance a double portion of the grace of the Spirit? What of the 3 youths? Did they not practice virginity, become mightier than fire, their bodies through virginity being made proof against the fire? And was it not Daniel's body that was so hardened by virginity that the wild beast's teeth could not fasten into it? Did not God, when he wished the Israelites to see him, bid them purify the body? Did not the priests purify themselves and so approach the temple's shrine and offer victims? And did not the law call chastity the great vow? That's book 4, chapter 24, exact exposition again.
Modishka Elizabeth also added as an example Boaz and Ruth.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And in that case, it was the foreigner was sanctified through marriage and became, as it were, grafted onto the people of Israel, and from her descended the Messiah.
I got another good one, Esther and Xerxes.
Mm-hmm. And as she says in the marriage ceremony, we list out a lot of these
Right.
examples. Okay.
And Tobias,
Mm-hmm.
he went into his wife even though the previous 7 husbands hadn't survived it.
Yep. So in the mystery of marriage, the church invokes the help of God on those being married, that they might understand, fulfill, and attain the aim set before them, namely to be a house church, to establish within the family truly Christian relationships, to raise children in the faith and live according to the gospel, to be example of piety for those around one, to bear with patience and humility and unavoidable sorrows and often sufferings which visit family life. Marriage gets us through all of that, and it becomes spiritual. This then is marriage when it takes place according to Christ. Spiritual marriage and spiritual birth, not of blood, nor of travail, nor of the will of the flesh. Such was the birth of Christ, not of blood, nor of travail. Such also was that of Isaac. Hear how the Scripture says, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Yea, a marriage it is not of passion nor of the flesh, but wholly spiritual, the soul being united to God by a union unspeakable, and which he alone knows. Therefore he says that he is joined unto the Lord in one spirit. Mark how earnestly he endeavors to unite both flesh with flesh and spirit with spirit. So that is marriage, and the concept of marriage, the purpose of marriage, and how we are to engage in it. It is not something that we enter into lightly or casually, or we try on for size, see whether or not we like it. It is something that fundamentally will change us. So let's talk a little bit about the ceremony of the marriage service. We have still a few minutes. What does the marriage ceremony consist of?
Betrothal and then the crowning.
The 2 rites, the betrothal and the crowning. And what are they? The betrothal represents the mutual consent of the bride and the groom to enter into marriage freely and willingly. And the crowning, or the marriage proper, is what?
The sanctification of the...
Sanctification.
Of the union.
God's blessing. So these 2 elements are necessary. Free consent on the part of the people entering into marriage, and God's blessing. And the service reflects that. Father Dimitri, in his manual on the divine services, the section on marriage, has this to say: as matrimony can be entered into only by the mutual spontaneous consent of both the parties, and they must receive the blessing of the church on their conjugal life, the order of the sacrament of matrimony consists of two rites, that of betrothal and that of marriage. In the former, man and woman affirm their mutual engagement before God and the church. The rings are the pledge of that engagement. In our day, the latter is performed immediately after the former. Both these rites must be performed in a church, in the presence of witnesses, and on certain days prescribed by the canons. Why must the marriage proper, the crowning, take place immediately after the betrothal? Let me put it this way. Was that always the case?
No.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be.
Okay. Why did the church change it so that it does have to be now?
So that you don't get stuck if one person dies or something.
Yes, there are a number of instances where the two were betrothed and it was a period of time and one died before the marriage was blessed. St. Olympia, I think, the deaconess of St. John Chrysostom, was betrothed, but the marriage never took place because her betrothed died. She considered herself married, and she was ordained a deaconess. But there was considerable comment and question about that. Could someone who has been betrothed but not been married, can they be married to someone else? Is that a first marriage? Is there a breaking of a vow or anything like that? And so the church, to eliminate the question, simply joins the two together. So in the betrothal, it starts how? At the door of the church. The priest approaches the main entrance of the church where the bride and groom already stand, the former at the groom's left side, blesses them thrice with 2 lighted candles, which he then hands to them. The bride and groom are each handed 1 candle. And then the betrothal begins and continues there. It begins with a great ectenia and 2 brief prayers with the addition of special petitions. What are the petitions for?
For their marriage.
What about their marriage? What do the petitions ask for? This is the question for anybody who's participated or listened to it.
Is this the one that's where they have to be fruitful and multiply?
Okay, so it's for the granting of children. It's for first for the salvation of the couple,
Salvation.
granting of children, peaceful mutual affection, abiding in harmony, firm in faith, and a blessing that they may lead a blameless life. These petitions are not just thrown out there to fill time. People need to pay attention to them. They are there for a purpose, which is why I asked the question.
Yes.
Then what happens after these prayers?
They exchange rings.
And what are the rings all about?
We just said earlier, the sign of the promise.
The sign of the promise. Yes. The priest takes from the altar the rings which he received from the bride and groom before the beginning of the service. With the golden ring, he makes the sign of the cross thrice over the groom's head with the words, "The servant of God name, is betrothed to the handmaid of God name, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." This he repeats thrice, then slips the ring on the 4th finger, next to the little finger, of the groom's right hand. The same proceeding is repeated with the bride's silver ring. After the betrothal, it is prescribed by the canons of the church that the sponsor, or as is now the established custom, the groom's best man shall change the rings thrice from one to the other, so that the bride's silver ring remains with the groom, and the groom's golden ring remains with the bride. The rings are then given them in token of the lifelong union in which they are entering. Note, in the ancient times, the rings were used as seals with which to seal storehouses in the houses, or storerooms in the houses. So the possession of the master's ring gave power in the household. Consequently, the exchange of rings meant mutual support and common power over the household. It's interesting how he puts the real meaning of that into the footnote.
Right.
But there it is. I mean, and you see, rings are not unique to Orthodox or Christian marriage. They've been used throughout. So they've been betrothed. The rings have been put on their fingers. Anybody note that one was silver and one was gold?
Yeah.
Why was that?
The hierarchy?
Hierarchy. And which one does the wife end up with?
The gold one.
The gold one. The husband's ring goes on her hand. Now, modern practice, what are the rings made out of?
Gold.
Both or one only?
Both.
Both. They basically are matching.
Yeah.
So, there's that. Now we talk about the marriage proper. After the rite of betrothal, the bride and groom approach nearer to the lectern, which is to say they're in the narthex, they now move into the center of the nave, holding the lighted candles and again preceded by the censing priest. This serves to remind them that they live their lives in conformity with the commandments of God, which the priest proclaims that their good deeds must shine in the world and rise to heaven like incense. As they approach, Psalm 127 is sung, in which are depicted the blessings which God sends to pious consorts. Blessed is everyone that feareth the Lord, that walketh in his ways. Now, there is one change. This was, as I said, the Manual of the Divine Services by Father Dmitry Sokolov was published with its English translation in 1899. That's the end of the 19th century. I'm not quite sure when he lived or when it wrote it. What has changed in the way the marriage service is now commonly done from what he has described? Nobody picked up on that.
I'm not remembering it well enough.
The incense is no longer used.
Oh.
Now it represents, as incense always represents, prayer rising to heaven. And in this case, their good deeds rising to heaven along with that. Why, at least in the Rocor, did the Rocor between 1899 and the end of the 20th century stop using incense commonly in the wedding service?
It's not used anywhere in the wedding service?
I can't say that, but I've never done it. And I'll tell you in a minute what I was told by another more experienced priest.
Is it because people started to think, oh, it's about a funeral?
That's what this experienced priest told me.
What?
The people attending the wedding, being ignorant, began to say, is this a wedding or a funeral?
Oh.
And so to allay comment, dampen down confusion, and not particularly instruct people, we simply don't light the censer. Wow. Then, once they're there and the psalm is finished, the rite begins with the blessing the kingdom of the Most Holy Trinity, followed by the great Ectenia. To this Ectenia are added petitions on behalf of the new consorts. What are the petitions for?
The same ones they did.
The procreating of children.
Repeat, yeah, just as in the betrothal. You did listen, very good, thank you. Grant them a blessing on their marriage, chastity, well-favored children, joy in them, a blameless life. The priest then says 3 prayers in which he asks the Lord to grant to the consorts a peaceful life, length of days, chastity, mutual love, long life to their children, grace in their offspring, an unfading crown of glory in the heavens, and the abundance of good things on earth, so that they may be enabled to assist the needy. So, don't say that the church never prays that we have good things on this earth. But why are we praying that we get them?
So we can assist those less fortunate.
Which is what?
Charity,
Which is also what?
love.
And the commandment of God. The whole of the services, all of the mysteries, will cover the same kinds of things, the themes and the petitions and so forth. Because this is how we live a Christian life. This is how we are able to engender a Christian life. So what is the central moment of the wedding service, the crowning service?
Central point of the crowning?
Well, okay, I
You
gave it
just
away.
gave it
Yes,
Yes,
it is the crowning.
Right.
The beginning moment in the existence of the Christian family is the sacred action of marriage. The chief part in the rite of the marriage, mystery of marriage, is the placing of the crowns upon those being married with the words, "The servant of God name is married to the handmaiden of God name, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." And then the common blessing of both with the thrice repeated short prayer, "O Lord our God, crown them with glory and honor." That's Father Michael in the dogmatic theology. So he is pinpointing the crowning as the point at which the marriage truly begins. Father Dimitri in the manual says this: "The crowns betoken their victory over their passions, as also the honor paid for them for the chastity of their life before marriage, and reminds them that must guard the purity of their lives after marriage also. In Greece, they use wreaths of myrtle and olive branches. In Russia, we use crowns in the shape of imperial ones, ornamented with the images of the Savior and his mother. This indicates that the newly wedded spouses are to become the progenitors, kniaz in the old language, of a new generation." Now, note that he talks about victory over the passions and honor paid for chastity before marriage. How important is that?
You're supposed to be.
Yes, and this is something that we really need to stress with our youth, that whether you're entering a life of virginity or chastity as a monastic or marriage, you must, as every fiber in your body possible, overcome any temptations to defile that. Because if we are going to live a Christian life, this is what we're called to do. And it is something that you will not regret having obtained, you will regret having not. And there's any number of instances where that's shown. After the crowning, what comes in the service?
The whole procession?
Before the,
Exchanging of the
Wine?
common cup.
Oh, yeah.
yes, but even before that, there's an epistle and a gospel. All of the, I believe all of the mysteries, the major sacramental mysteries, have readings from the scriptures, epistle and gospel. The epistle lesson speaks of the importance of the sacrament of matrimony and of the mutual duties of the consorts. And we've been quoting extensively from St. John Chrysostom's commentary on that epistle. The gospel lesson tells of Christ's presence at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. The readings are followed by the triple ectenia and by the ectenia of supplication. ending with the chanting of the Lord's Prayer. Then a cup with wine is brought. The priest blesses the cup and presents it alternately to the husband and the wife to drink from 3 times each. This common cup signifies that they must live in an indissoluble union and share with each other joy and sorrow. The priest takes them by the hand and leads them 3 times around the lectern, while the sponsors, in Russia the best men, follow holding the crowns above their heads. During the circumambulation, the same hymns are sung as at an ordination. This ceremony is symbolical of the solemnity and indissolubility of the conjugal union. That's Father Dimitri in the manual. When the priest takes them around to go around the central table, which has the gospel and the cross on it, he will use his epitrail, his stole, and he'll bind their hands together. They'll join their right hands, husband and wife holding their right hands together, and the priest will bind those hands together with his epitrail, his stole. And he'll hold the cross up and lead them with the cross around the circuit while these hymns are being sung. That's more than symbolic. They are being bound together by the grace of God. They are being led to follow the cross. The cup will symbolize drinking to the dregs life.
Full life.
What's that?
A full life.
A full life, however long that may be, for good or for ill, the troubles you're going to face, the joys you're going to have. The hymns that are sung, he says, are the same as ordination. What are those hymns?
Rejoice, O Isaiah, virgin sweet child,
Mm-hmm.
so call his name Emmanuel. And then the martyrs,
Martyrs.
and then
That's the Mother of God, the martyrs,
Mhm.
and
oh yeah, the mother of God.
And Isaiah.
Isaiah.
It's interesting that this is the same as
As a priest.
in the ordination. Yes. And in a sense, a priest is united, as it were, to his flock.
Well, and the marriage is establishing a house church.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And who are the leaders in the house church?
The
The husband and the wife, the newly married couple.
mother and father.
Okay? Other comments, thoughts? Since I got caught trying to sneak this in last time, pop quiz.
Yes.
What are the ways of life that are blessed by God?
Monasticism and marriage.
Monasticism and marriage, that's correct. Why is marriage, quote, the fundamental unit of society in the church?
Because it's how the next generation is raised.
True.
And because it's a little microcosm of the church.
And the world, for that matter. It's how our lives are organized, which is what makes it a fundamental unit. And if you think about society, again, common societal norms notwithstanding, society is built upon the building blocks of families, which come together into communities, which form towns or cities, states, nations, and so on. The church, the house churches of the families come together communally to a parish, The parishes are brought together into dioceses, the dioceses into provinces, and the provinces into national churches. And ultimately, that is the way the church is organized as well. What does it mean that there's a hierarchy in marriage? We've talked about there being a hierarchy, and we've talked a little bit about why there is, but what does it mean?
Well, it means that each have roles according to their innate natures.
Correct. That's basically what it means. So St. Paul talks about, not specifically about marriage, but he says, are all apostles, are all teachers, are all able to speak in tongues, interpret tongues, and so forth. Each person has a gift given by God, a role that they play, or that they engage in. And the hierarchy is the way in which this is all structured. Think about the hierarchy as a structure. It is not despotism or tyranny. Where does that come from?
That's the devil.
Godlessness.
The devil. Godlessness, yes. Why are the bride and the groom crowned?
Because they're going to be the king and queen of a new family.
Yep. And
It represents martyrdom too.
it does.
Crown of
And
their,
The victory over their passion.
the victory over their
that's
passions.
right.
Mhm. All three of those. Note that there are multiple meanings to these symbols, as there are to so many of the things of the church and the scriptures themselves. Every time you read the divine scriptures, you can pick up a new meaning that is there, that is intended. It's just layered on top of one another. So that's what I had on marriage. Anybody have anything else? Any other comments?
No,
Questions?
not at this point.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Well, it's difficult to understand how, I mean, it's difficult for a person maybe who's not Orthodox to understand how the church fits into that life that the man and woman create together.
You're right. If you remove God from your life, then what place is there for anything divine in your marriage? It becomes a completely, simply worldly arrangement. And as with all worldly, earthly arrangements, it's not permanent. It can't be. And there's nothing there beyond whatever you personally are going to put into it. Whereas with God and the blessing of the church, it's not just the husband and the wife who are struggling with their passions to overcome them together and individually. There's a blessing of God that's bestowed upon them, and it's uplifting to them.
And there's an interplay between the house church and the church.
Right.
Exactly. So all of that ends up bringing more, so that the sum is greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, if you will. Because there's the divinity in it, both in terms of God's blessing, Christ's sanctification, and the church. And that's how living a Christian life, an Orthodox Christian life, will bring salvation. That's a good place to end.
Okay.
Solid.
the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim. Thee who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, the